During the Stone Age, there were several archaic Stone Age races or lineages. In Europe, you had the European hunter-gatherer and Eastern hunter-gatherer clan, whereas to the east, situated around what is modern Sweden, Russia, and Ukraine, they had pale complexion, blue eyes, and fair hair colors, blonde, brown, and so on. These were also divided into a Western hunter-gatherer, an Eastern hunter-gatherer clan. To the west, they had darker complexion and blue eyes, whereas to the east, situated around what is modern Sweden, Russia, and Ukraine, they had pale complexion, blue eyes, and fair hair colors, blonde, brown, and so on. Here's some information about the Eastern hunter-gatherer's general complexion and appearance from a site that has done genetic testing to get such information. In ancient Anatolia, a group known as Anatolian hunter-gatherers lived. These are the same genetics as modern-day Sardinians in Italy, and most likely resembled them by appearance due to having identical genetics still to this day. Here is the same site from before showing these Anatolian hunter-gatherers' complexion and appearances by genetic testing. A third group known as Natufian hunter-gatherers resided in Middle East, ancestral to modern Middle Eastern people. Here are the same site again, showing the Middle Eastern region of this time by appearance and complexion. There was a second group around Caucasus known as Caucasus hunter-gatherers. Pause the video and look at Kosh. These were a different group with fair complexion, similar to modern Caucasus people, and mainly ancestral to these people in northern Middle East region mainly. But they're all a little bit of a mix. In general, modern Europeans are made up of a mix between the European hunter-gatherers of Eastern Europe with fair complexion, blue eyes, hair colors, and the Sardinian Italian farmers that moved into Europe from Anatolia. Please note that during these times, modern Turkish people had not yet inhabited the Anatolia region. The people that lived there during these times, Anatolian hunter-gatherers, were genetically like modern Italian Sardinians, not modern Turkish people. So a modern European is a mix of these Stone Age races, European hunter-gatherers and Italian Sardinian or Greek people's farmers to simplify, while a Middle Eastern person is a mix between a Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Natshefian hunter-gatherer. So here we have a genetic testing site where you can match modern DNA tests with ancient samples to get an idea of who are our most ancient relatives and get a further grasp and understanding of our ancestry. Here are some major different modern population groups to get a basic understanding. Feel free to pause and look at information shown during this video to truly grasp the picture shown for better clarification. As seen, Europeans are made up of a mix of European hunter-gatherers and Sardinian farmers, while Middle Eastern people are made up of a mix of Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Natshefian hunter-gatherers. What is interesting about these DNA testing sites is that you can get a much better understanding of human history, migrations, and genetic influence during different time periods. Something that was taught to us all in school was, for example, how farming was invented by Middle Eastern peoples and then spread from there into Europe. But remember how I said Middle Eastern people descend from Caucasus, and while Europeans from Sardinian and Euro hunter-gatherers. So let's look at this time period when farming was invented. It was known as the pre-Neolithic pottery. What we can see by these DNA test results is that in Anatolia, the people had strictly Sardinian DNA, and farming didn't start among the Natufians until we see an influx of Sardinian DNA among the Natufians, as can be seen here. They gained Sardinian DNA. Now, if the Natufians were responsible for inventing farming, we would see some form of genetics from Natufians among the farmers that moved into Europe and brought farming with them. However, the farmers that went to Europe and brought the farming technology with them had no trace of any Natrian genetics. So the common key point here is that farming didn't start in the Levant region until the Natufians get Sardinian DNA, and the farmers that moved into Europe had no trace of Natshefian genes, meaning that farming started amongst the Italian Sardinians of Anatolia and brought or taught to both Middle Eastern peoples and Europeans by them. The ancient today it's only really Europeans that have major Anatolian ancestry. These Anatolians were the ones who were responsible for the megalithic cultures of ancient Europe, building Stonehenge and so forth, and brought farming with them, causing a giant explosion in population numbers. Contrary to what many may think, the first and largest civilizations were amongst these people in Anatolia and Europe. You had the Ukrainian culture with large city complexes and thousands of houses and circular formations, much older than any other early civilizations, made up of Europeans. To the north, when these farmers came into contact with the European hunter-gatherers, the hunter-gatherers were much fewer in numbers due to less effective food production. They hunted and had a much harsher lifestyle, but this also made them more physically prominent, taller, more muscular, and stronger than the farmers who survived on mainly grains, which also is very apparent by studying the skeleton of these groups. The European hunter-gatherers had much more robust skeletal frame and skulls. Despite their much fewer numbers, we see how the farmers in northern Europe get all their male lineages completely replaced by these European hunter-gatherers, while their total ancestry only comes from them by around 20%, in line with their fewer population numbers. So what conclusion we can draw from this? Due to all their male lineages being replaced, despite the hunter-gatherers being much fewer, the hunter-gatherer male were able to completely dominate and replace all the farmer males and take control of the farmer societies in northern Europe. And because the European hunter-gatherers had genetics for fair hair color, blue eyes, and so on, despite being only responsible for 20% of the total admixture, but 100% of the male lineages, we see that these farmer groups still adapt to the blonde hair, blue eyes genetics of the hunter-gatherers, despite them only being responsible for 20% of the total DNA. So that just further confirms they must have been in control or charge, basically conquering and dominating the farmers. To the east in Russia, the European hunter-gatherers still remained as unmixed groups, while in Western Central Europe they had become a 20 and 80 mix of European hunter-gatherer and so. They lived in a way side by side for a long time until around 5,000 years ago. The European hunter-gatherers still remaining in Russia and Ukraine region had domesticated the horse and invented wagons and wheels. They then invaded Western Europe, and much like the previous European hunter-gatherers who had conquered the European farmers, these later European hunter-gatherers did so once more again, causing a new mix in Central Europe around Germany, Poland and Scandinavian region, where the end result became a more 50 mix of European hunter-gatherer and European farmer, and this level has remained unchanged since then for 5,000 years. This is basically the birth of modern European peoples as they are today, more or less unchanged since then 5,000 years ago. This caused them to adopt the invading Russians' warrior culture, and they later spread further west into British Isles, France, Spain and Italy, forming the Belgica culture, just a western expansion of the corded ware culture of Central Europe. So since they were a 50-50 mix in Central Europe around Germany, the further west and south they went into Europe and encountered even more Sardinian farmers. Their ratio obviously decreased, or they gained once again more Sardinian ancestry. So amongst modern Europeans, what differentiates the north versus south is not the actual ancestors, but just how much from each group you have. In northern Europe it's around a 50-50 split of each group, while in southern Europe it's more of a 30-70 split, but dominated by the male lineages of these Russian warrior peoples descended from European hunter-gatherers. This is why all European languages have a common ancestor from these people, and similar religions with thunder gods, Thor and Zeus. In Central Europe, these people didn't just move west and south and conquer all of Europe. They also traveled east, reaching as far as Siberia, where they resided and were known as the Sintashta culture, still having Central European DNA. Here you can see DNA tests of these Sintashta. They still were fully Europeans. They had slightly higher European hunter-gatherer ancestry to modern Europeans by about 5 to 10%, and likewise 5 to 10% lower Sardinian ancestry, but that was the only difference. They invented the first spoked wheels and chariots, and further bred the horses into what would become the major horse lineage of all domesticated horses in the entire world. Every horse anywhere in the world descend from these Europeans' horses. The Dam 2 line, with their chariots and horses, they eventually migrated further and came as far as China, India, and Iran. Here are DNA of them during their migration patterns. At the top you see corded ware. Then Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and here we have an Iranian sample consisting of a 50 mix of local Iranian and we know by ancient sources that the Iranian was ruled by an elite with names from these peoples, and they also have a language descending from them just like Indian people. With the caste system in India, it is simply that these Europeans conquered and ruled India and Iran in ancient times, and even today you can find around 10 to 15% of European DNA in Iranian and Indian peoples due to ancient Europeans conquered and ruled them at start of human civilization. This is further not as confirmed, but we also see this European DNA spreading down as far as Levant region during these times, and the people known as the Hyksos, that had horses and chariots, and practiced horse burials like these people did, later conquered ancient Egypt too. It was the first time the ancient Egyptians were conquered by outsiders, and it was when the ancient Egyptians were taught the wheel and gained horses. Of course, this was thanks to Europeans, but if the Hyksos were a non-European group that had been taught horses and chariots by the Europeans, or if they were Europeans themselves is hard to know for sure without DNA testing of these Hyksos people. What we do know is that one pharaoh was later found with a European male lineage, which is interesting. Either way, Europeans conquered or traveled to the entire Old World at the start of human civilization, and came to dominate most the people they encountered, creating or causing their ancient cultures, languages, religion, and history. The Hyksos people were later expelled, and the pharaoh allowed them to leave through the desert to Syria. Hundreds of thousands of households left with all their possessions and traveled the desert, all the way back to Syria where they had come from. We have ancient epicentons of Syrian people with horses that have even blue eyes and complexions trading with the pharaohs, and also even blonde blue-eyed ancient depictions of Iranians. And this is the same time period as the Exodus of the Bible, and the expulsion of the Hyksos is the only known large-scale expulsion of a people in history from Egypt, making it very reasonable to have led to the story of the Exodus, which there have been several scholars that agreed to. So, even further, the people of the Exodus could have possibly been people that ancestrally came all the way from Europe and European people. Meanwhile, in Europe, these people of the corded ware that remained formed the Nordic Bronze Age culture, centered around Denmark and southern Sweden and northern Germany. Many similarities are found between the people of the Nordic Bronze Age and Sintashta, and even the people mentioned in the Rig Veda texts, the oldest, most ancient texts of Indian people. Similarities in culture and so forth are detected, which isn't very strange. They were the same peoples. These are also the people to become the Germanic peoples that came to dominate most of northwestern Europe and later settled North America. From now on, I'll just reference them as the Germanic peoples. During the Bronze Age, Scandinavia and northern Germany, these people had the oldest depictions of spoked wheels anywhere in Europe, and at the same time as they appeared in Middle East. Obvious back and forth connections were held with the people that remained in Europe and those that traveled east to discover the world. In ancient Indian texts about them, they were even said to have a curiosity in wanting to see what was at the edge of the world. Europeans have always been adventurous people, climbing Mount Everest, reaching the skies in space, so that it was already in their spirit at start of human civilization is maybe not surprising. Also, they invented the first cars, airplanes, spaceships, so that they also invented the first wheels, wagons, chariots, and horse travel at start of human civilization is maybe not very surprising either. Horse wagon, car, airplane, spaceship, Viking ships to travel with. It seems to be an integral part of their identity. During the Nordic Bronze Age of the Germanic peoples, they not only had the oldest epicentons of spoked wheel chariots, as can be seen here in ancient Scandinavian tomb, but also the Nebra sky disk, the oldest accurate depiction of the cosmos anywhere in the world. Nordic Bronze Age became the richest culture in Europe, just like the Scythians people to the east. In Russia also were the same peoples, with their own tombs and chambers. When you read about them on Wikipedia, it says they were Iranian-speaking peoples, and you might think they would have been Middle Eastern. But let's not forget, Iranian is a European language. They were genetically like North European peoples. The Greeks mentioned them as blue-eyed and red or fair-haired, but they also had the first actual combat-ready swords. Metal and daggers had been around since 3000 BC, and elongated daggers are found that could mimic a sword. But these earlier swords were weak and would bend in combat. The first swords strong enough to withstand slashing without bending were known as the Naui II type sword. It revolutionized warfare. And looking at this map, you can see how the Germanic warrior culture were absolutely full of them. The Nordic Bronze Age versions were also much larger than anywhere else. Modern replicas are even hard to grip or wield. Their spearheads were also much larger, maybe due to North Europeans being on average some of the tallest people anywhere on the planet. We see how northwestern Germanic people dominate strongman competitions, and on studies of grip strength they have actually the highest strength out of any people. There wasn't writing in this region, but rock art depictions of what could be considered major battles. Let's remember that before paper in schools, only a few people would even learn writing, and sending a messenger on horse was just as efficient. When writing actually became useful, European nations were the first, where the major population as a whole became literate. The earliest males were known as battle axe culture and had stone hammers similar to boats in shape. This is probably what led to the Thor's hammer legacy. The males were buried with these hammers facing west, and the women with pottery facing east. With these stone hammers and horses, they would conquer everyone they encountered. Later during Bronze Age, they gained the sword. They also had, which we find as far as Central Europe, the first bronze armors and bronze shields. The Germanic culture was the most prominent and richest culture of Europe. Contemporary to them were the Celtic cultures. These people were basically replaced or beaten in the end by Rome, but they were of similar genetic makeup to other Europeans. Celts in Britain were basically Germanic but spoke a different mother tongue. Just like how Germanic people today have different languages, it was just an older split of languages. But the mother lineage of Celtic ceased to exist during the Bronze Age collapse, a time where all Middle Eastern cultures were basically destroyed, only with the weakened Egypt remaining. Is around the same time as the Hyksos conquered Egypt and were expelled, around 1200 BC. There is even at such an old age a DNA test of someone with pure Swedish DNA found as far as Middle East, and we have ancient Greeks with basically North European DNA, so the Europeans for sure were in contact as a region. We know Nordic Bronze Age and Mycenaean Greece did trade. The Sea Peoples were a group consisting of many different, most likely European peoples that together went in to destroy and plunder all of the Middle East, leading to the Bronze Age collapse of this region. There are also ancient stories of how the pharaoh of this time sent emissaries to Scandinavia threatening them into subjugation. It seems likely that the European peoples being threatened by the ancient Egyptians in some way or form would lead one of the first crusades into Middle East, basically conquering and destroying the entire region. Having superior weaponry and armor with their newly invented bronze swords and bronze armors, they were able to defeat them as During this Bronze Age collapse, we see how the Mycenaean Greeks that on DNA tests resemble still European farmers or Sardinians are replaced by Central European DNA, very similar to how these people conquered everyone. And we get the Bronze Age Greeks known as Athenians, Spartans from this point forward. The Helots that were conquered farmer slaves by the Spartans, for example, were most likely just these ancient Mycenaean farmer Greeks, now ruled by more northern European conquerors that gave ancient Greece their Central European religions and deities like Zeus and Thor. After this point, not much seemed to happen. The Germanic and Celtic people thrive and go about their day. The new Germanic Greeks adopt a warrior culture and thunder god religion, just like the Italians had done 1,000 years earlier. Here a Urnfield culture warrior, same technology that the later Spartans would use, and also a DNA test of ancient Greek warriors during Bronze Age being Central Europeans. It was basically German people that went down to Greece with their metal armors and weapons and became the Spartans, most likely blonde Achilles that ruled the farmer Helot, until around year 400 BC when Rome started developing as a for 3,000 years. The Central European culture had been the most dominant and richest and technologically advanced, but now the Southern Europeans that were their genetic cousins started to grow in power. On DNA tests of Republic Rome, the time of Julius Caesar where Rome conquered all their terrain, we see how they had DNA similar to modern Spanish people, or Southern French, basically North Italian, and at the later stages of Rome before it ends they get a lot of immigrants which is more in line with modern Italian peoples. Except for the North Italians. They are able to subjugate everyone they encounter, all of Middle Eastern peoples, and they conquer all the Celtic peoples of France and British Isles. But then something happened. The Romans encountered the Germanic tribes of northern Germany, Denmark, and southern Sweden, and for the first time their expansion comes to a halt and they never expand after this defeat. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest. If these Germans had not defeated Rome, then the same fate of Germanic people would have been that of the Celts in France or Britain, and modern history would have been very different today. But the Germanic people had been the most prominent culture and the motherland of all Europeans. You don't defeat your origin, that is. Everyone else the Romans were able to defeat with ease, but the Germanic people slaughtered them and crushed their empire and sacked the city of Rome that nobody had done for 800 years. Now the Germanic people start flooding out of the Germanic regions. Goths from southern Sweden move to Poland and form the wheelbark culture. Ship burials and stone circles like in Scandinavia and later Anglo-Saxon Britain start appearing in Poland. Here are some DNA tests of these early wheelbark culture Goths. There are also Y-DNA genetic tests confirming they were of Scandinavian origin with I1 haplogroup. Many different Germanic tribes from Sweden, Denmark, and northern Germany spread out, conquering all of Europe once again. They end the Roman Empire, after which they defeat the Huns and Attila in a major battle. They move into all the previous Roman-occupied regions. The Anglo-Saxons take control of British Isles. Beowulf, a hero of the Geats or Goths, came from southern Sweden. You have the Germanic tribe of Franks that formed France, and so forth. Then another 500 years or so, and you have the Vendel period in Sweden, with helmets like the one of Sutton who Anglo-Saxon ship burial, similar to the Geatish or Vendel regions of Sweden. The Slavic tribes to the east were also known as Wends. Considering how every time there is some confusion in history, that points to it being Germanic people doing something that is denied by everyone, like the Goths or the Indo-Europeans. It always ends up being exactly that in the end. I think the Vendel people like Beowulf, Sutton, who had probably something to do with the Wends or early Slavs too, considering they later formed Russia with the Viking period. An earlier version of this doesn't seem unlikely. But then you have the Viking Age, the Swedes to the east of modern Sweden, the Geats or Goths to the south, and western coast being split between Denmark and Norway. The Swedes on modern Sweden's east coast went east and formed Russia and fought as Varangian God under that during this time was Greek peoples. The Turks didn't live there until after they conquered it, and from that point on no more Vikings went there. The Swedish law even made it illegal at this point, so the Vikings were gods for the Greeks and even fought Seljuk Turk invasions into Byzantine to help defend Constantinople and Christianity from the Seljuk Turks. Then the Geats in central Sweden obviously had some connection with Anglo-Saxon Brittany, and most likely went west with the Danes and Norwegians and the west coast Swedes that at this time were Danes and Norwegians to discover America. The Vikings pretty much did the same thing as all previous Germanic ancestors had done, explored everything. Then the Crusades did the same thing once more. Alexander the Great in his expansion defeated the Mongols, who were able to subjugate everyone, but never Germanic people. They remain unconquerable to this day. And the British and Franks did the same thing as their Germanic Gothic Anglo-Saxon ancestors did, conquered. Later these Germanic people invented the car, airplanes, and spaceships, and it's a great history of these people. But for all Europeans of course too, since the common ancestors and language family of European languages and people, Germanic people DNA are so similar they could be the same country or their own ethnicity compared to other countries' ethnicities, which they in effect are. Germanic ethnicity. Northwestern Europeans